So soon after, Vincent Harding, a noted Black theologian and civil rights leader, had witnessed Barack Obama deliver his acceptance speech for the nomination of the Democratic candidate for presidency. He wrote a widely published essay midwifing a New America. Harding knew that the following year was going to be the 40th anniversary of his dear friend, Dr. Martin Luther King's assassination. Added to this, Harding's friend, Rabbi Arthur Wasco, reminded him that while we have come to speak of human gestation, of a woman's time of giving birth as 9 months, the traditional figure was actually 40 weeks. So there was something about that 40 that was happening. Harding wrote, "I could not escape another metaphor. Not only is something trying to be born in America, but some of us are called to be the midwives of this magnificent and desperately needed and so painfully creative process." Harding continued that their roles as midwives, some act actually as hospice attendants, helping, encouraging that fetus to give up one surely satisfying life for the great possibility of moving towards something and unknown, but something more. So midwives and hospice attendants may work together in this powerful moment, helping us to face the pain of dying and being born. For that change to occur, something needs to die, that's safety for the baby, and something needs to be born, that coming into the new world. This is where I feel, actually, our Unitarian Universalist faith is. We're waking up, and that moment of history is right here with us now. That we can possibly create that Unitarian Universalism that has never been and yet must be. Some of us tend to that new life, that new way of being born, and some of us need to tend to the mourning of the death of the old way. Both attentions are necessary and vital because, guess what, people? That Unitarian Universalism, that new Unitarian Universalism is being born. Midwives and hospice attendants, that's what's needed right now in our faith. Those who will let people be comforted and assured that this dying is not a terrible thing, but a necessary thing for whatever the stage is next. They need to help them let go. And those of us will bring that new life into existence, forging ahead. Midwives typically say to mothers, "You can do this, come on, you're able to do this." So in this time in Unitarian Universalism, we need some of us to do the same, to say, don't be afraid. We can do this. We're not sure what, no, we can. We need to shift that Unitarian Universalist culture from a white supremacy culture to a multicultural one. And that does not imply getting rid of completely the one. It means we need to open up to include more cultures. We have to decenter whiteness and center voices of color and experiences of color. And what might that look like? As a person of African descent, I must be able to overcome my fear and let go of that fear, to name the needs of the things I need differently done in UU spaces. And those things are typically a little bit different than my white counterpart, because the institution was built to cover those needs of my white counterpart. I also have to walk in the shoes of my other siblings of color, because while we're all clumped together as non-white, my Latinx sibling will have a different experience than me. So the center gets bigger as more people's needs are addressed within the congregation. So I've been a part of 4 congregations, Unitarian Universalist congregations. The first one I joined was Sojourner Truth Congregation, STC, as we used to lovingly say, was an intentionally religious, diverse congregation. And it was founded by the very first ordained African-American woman in our faith. STC had no one particular group that constantly determined the work of the congregation. And if I would have to pick which culture was typically reflected, I would have to say probably African American, which is very different than the rest of our Unitarian Universalist spaces. I loved that space. I was nurtured and cared for and encouraged and pushed and empowered to be that whole self. That's what church does. Allows us to be our whole self as we look to find meaning in the world. Unfortunately, Sojourner Truth Congregation was ahead of its time in our UU world, and it actually dissolved. Our members joined other UU congregations, like this one actually. I know a friend of mine that is a member here now. I joined All Souls Church instead, and there I helped create a People of Color caucus. Within that caucus, we actually used to divide into the different ethnicities, and to this day, All Souls Black folks still exist and meet regularly. And in the congregation where I did my internship, we formed another People of Color group. And the participants found it meaningful to be with one another, to support one another in that predominantly white denomination. After I left, the members actually created a vision for a multiracial, multicultural church to add their voices into the congregational's work around racial equity within the congregation. And currently based at Cedar Lane, I create spaces now again for Unitarian Universalists of color from various congregations, because some of us don't have enough to quite have that one critical element. And I do similar affinity work like that, actually, for the LGBT members that are Unitarian around the area. And actually, next Sunday, I'll be hosting a barbecue at Cedar Lane for our queer members, and I will be joining you the following Sunday for a gathering, probably for the first time, of Unitarian Universalists of color here at River Road and their multiracial families. There's something powerful about coming together. You know, Mark Morrison Reed said, sometimes we need that strength, that community, to work on things. We can work on things in our groups that look and feel like us, to strengthen ourselves, to be that multiracial, beloved community we so desperately want. And it also helps us know that people are doing similar work in their other congregations. We must do the work we need to do within our walls, not just outside of our walls. When we think of justice, we think of justice out there. I would argue we need justice in here. We need to be able to honor all voices at the table. So for me, as a Unitarian Universalist, I know my work might be different than yours, but I need to let go of that fear. That's what I need to do, to bring my voice to the table so that we can widen that circle for everybody. Fanny Barrier Williams, one of our African American Unitarian foremothers in the 19th century, once said, religion should stand more for love than doctrine, more for human worth than church name. What men and women do, rather than what they say or profess, shall be that standard of religion. So let's continue to build that beloved community right here, right now, at River Road. So may it be. Ashe.
Why do we keep talking about race, Reverend Nancy? People ask me why. Why do we keep talking about race in the midst of it all? Why do we stay inside the difficult work of this ministry here at River Road when the whole world feels painful enough, when the issues are more than our minds can hold or our hearts can handle, when the winds and floods and fires seem to be actually tearing everything apart, and the gunfire blasts with no discernible motive beyond rage itself? Why, people ask me, do we keep talking about race? Because under all of this bleeding, and underneath all of this collective uncertainty, underneath the political moment this nation is in, and underneath the persistent threats of nuclear escalation and environmental devastation in our world, underneath it all runs the original sin of white supremacy and the construction of whiteness itself that has brought us to the verge of every form of human destruction. As James Baldwin wrote half a century ago, whites have brought humanity to the edge of oblivion because they believe they are white. And once they have bought into that constructed identity, it is an identity that cultures will go to enormous and immoral lengths to protect and to defend with every form of violence possible. I'm just going to come out and say it. The economic tension between the white working class and the increasingly wealthy 1% in this country did not get Donald Trump elected President of the United States. White working class people living somewhere else did not do this to the rest of the country. Donald Trump won literally every single demographic of white people in this country. Every one. Whiteness got that man elected. Which is not to say that everyone who voted for him is a racist. Do not go home and tweet that I said that. No. Yet, like other people before him and since, like other candidates and public figures seeking to conserve their power before him and since, Donald Trump ran his campaign in defense of whiteness at all costs. And in this country, that argument won. White supremacy, not in hooded sheets, but in the ballot box, in the hometown streets, and the neighborhood association, and yes, the local congregation. White supremacy got him elected, and it's driving so much of what we weep over and struggle against today. We keep talking about it because if we don't, we cannot authentically speak to the showers of bullets and the rising flood tides and the rights of women and the freedoms for our siblings of many faiths. We keep talking about it because to do otherwise would be to remain quietly complicit, and the stakes of absolutely everything are too high for such caution. I am a white woman whose immigrant ancestors were once Irish. My people, like so many others, bought into the mythos of their own whiteness because while they were poor white trash, at least their culture told them they weren't black. My own immigrant ancestors could subsist on the crumbs of oppressive empire without seeking to challenge that empire, in part because their culture told us that there was someone somewhere who was worse off, that there was someone somewhere they were still better than. The identity of my people was constructed in whiteness, and whiteness as a part of this construction is premised on supremacy. This is not a judgment of my ancestors as such. It is just the truth that powerful people, since the dawn of our country's history, have profited from the invention of whiteness. And the invention of whiteness perpetuates some myths and expectations on the part of people like me that we will be at the center of every struggle, that in every great game we will have a full and honest hand. Our culture has taught white people that we have a measure of power, which means when push comes to shove and we grab ourselves by the bootstraps and we hit upon the right plan, we, the people who think we are white, can lead the way to a whole new world. And my only message today is a simple one and a difficult one. I ask myself and all of us to get engaged in the dismantling of white supremacy, and I know that what I am asking is that you get involved in work you will not always succeed at or be in the center of. I am asking us all to try, and by asking that, I am asking us all at times to fail. The work of dismantling white supremacy, of taking the constructed and erasing identity of whiteness that was foisted on this culture and pulling it out of the center of our hearts, out of the center of our life together, out of the center of our power structures. It is not a game, and we are not going to win. Nothing in the work of dismantling racism and opposing white supremacy is inherently and completely doable, and we will not get the chance to retreat when the full reality of how hard the work is dawns on every single one of us. We are not going to win. Nobody is going to line up to praise us. We are not going to get this right. Leaders will have to become apprentices, and we, all of us, those who believe we are white, and those of us who hold a variety and myriad of other identities but know for a fact they are not white in this culture, all of us, we who are loyal to a greater whole than we can even comprehend in our most fearful moments, even though we will never win, and even though the work will always be hard, we are still the ones we have been waiting for, and we are not alone. James Baldwin also said that in the isolation of our own hearts, you think your pain and your heartbreak are unprecedented in the whole history of the world, but then you read. And then you encounter each other. And then you come to church on Sunday morning. And then you arrive for a congregation's life that pushes you beyond yourself. And then you show up. And when we think beyond our confusion and our isolation, when we think beyond the isolation that grips us so often and look around and open our hearts to all the heartbreaking truth, when we see that those who have been at the center can, in fact, make room for new voices while staying engaged in the work that lies ahead. We will not win, but we will move forward together. And while the way will not be conventionally gratifying, while the work of midwifing a whole new world will be hard, the food for our souls will make itself known in that work. And we, all of the people who are not afraid to be blessed by our own failure, we will take up the task all over again. Amen.